Hi everyone, today I'm going to tell you the one true story. Please support me by liking and subscribing. Thanks, are you ready? Here we go. Lena woke to the hum of her alarm clock, but the sound wasn't the same. It was there, yes, but muffled, as though the air around it had thickened, making the noise feel distant. She rubbed her eyes, her hand moving slowly, as though the weight of the world had suddenly pressed down on her. She stared at the clock, watching the seconds tick by. Her mind felt sluggish, dragging like an old, rusty machine. It had been like this for a few days now, the muffled noises. She had noticed it when she first woke up, but at first, she had chalked it up to the exhaustion of life, the constant stress. But it was different today. The hum of her alarm was softer, distant. The world outside her bedroom felt wrong. She reached for her phone, trying to call her mother as she had every morning for the last 5 years. It was just routine, a quick check-in. She dialed, waiting for the familiar ringtone to sound. But instead, there was nothing. No ring, no sound. Not even the soft static that usually came before the call connected. She tried again. Same thing. No sound at all. A shiver ran down her spine. She pulled herself out of bed and walked into the kitchen, trying to ignore the thickening feeling in her chest. The floor creaked under her feet, and she paused, listening. But there was nothing. No sound. Even her footsteps, the usual creaks, the soft thud of her shoes, all of it seemed to fade into the space around her. "Hello?" she called, her voice soft and tentative. She hated the way it sounded, as though she were unsure of whether it belonged to her or not. The echo of her own voice bounced around her apartment, but there was something in the air that made it feel distant, as though someone else's voice had called out in her place. Lena shook her head and tried to shake off the sensation, blaming it on her lack of sleep. Maybe she was just tired. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just that. Something was wrong. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the vibration cutting through the stillness. She pulled it out, relieved to see a message from her friend Maya. "You awake?" Lena quickly typed back, "Yeah, just got up." "Why?" She stared at the screen as the little dots appeared, then stopped and then appeared again. Maya was typing, but the dots disappeared. She stared at the screen for what felt like minutes, but still no reply came. A chill ran down her spine. Lena typed another message. No response. Confused, she called Maya's number. This time, the phone didn't even ring. It just stopped. As though Maya wasn't even there, her phone disconnected from the world. Lena blinked, staring at the screen. It was as if Maya had never been there at all. The silence around her deepened. It began to press in on her, like the weight of 1,000 hands on her chest. Lena walked back into the living room, feeling a strange sensation of vertigo. She glanced out the window, hoping to see something familiar, something to ground her. But even outside, the world felt strange. The street was empty. No cars. No pedestrians. It was like the entire city had been erased from existence. The silence was suffocating. She stood there for a long time, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to talk to someone. Anyone. But her mind kept returning to the same thought. Where did they all go? Her phone buzzed again. It was a text from her sister, Eliza. "Call me when you get a chance." Relief washed over her as she dialed Eliza's number. The phone rang. It rang for what felt like an eternity, and Lena felt the cold sweat prickling her skin. Finally, the call connected. But there was no voice, no greeting, no hello, not even the usual static of a bad connection. Just silence. "Eliza!" Lena's voice shook. Still nothing. She could hear her own breathing, but that was all. "What is happening?" She tried again, and again. She texted her, called her, but every time, the same thing. Silence. Lena sank to her knees, her hands trembling as they pressed against her ears. The weight of it all was too much to bear. Her world, once so vibrant and full of life, had crumbled into a terrifying abyss of nothingness. And then, as if it were a nightmare she couldn't wake from, Lena began to notice something else. The world outside her apartment. The city, the people, the sounds, all seemed to fade. The wind had stopped howling against her window, The faint hum of electricity that usually buzzed in the background was gone. She looked around, and it was as if the world had swallowed itself up. She stood up again, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had to leave. She needed to find someone. She grabbed her jacket and rushed out the door. The streets were empty. Not a single soul in sight. No footsteps, no voices, no cars, nothing. The air felt thick, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken as she walked down the street, eyes darting from side to side. It was as if she had stepped into a ghost town. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Not even a whisper. The terror clawed at her throat. What was happening? Why couldn't anyone hear her? She began to run, her feet pounding against the pavement, but the silence followed her like a shadow. She turned a corner and saw a figure ahead, walking slowly. It was a man, his back to her, his posture stiff. "Hey!" she called, desperate. But there was nothing. No movement. He didn't react. Lena's pulse raced. She reached out and touched his shoulder, feeling the coldness of his skin. Still, he didn't turn around. No reaction, as if she weren't even there. The weight of the silence pressed harder against her chest, crushing the air out of her lungs. She stumbled back, her breath coming faster now, frantic. Her world was closing in, the edges of it darkening, the corners of her vision fading. She felt as though she were losing herself, disappearing into the nothingness. She backed away, looking for someone, anyone. But there was no one left. The entire city had fallen into this terrifying stillness. Her feet felt like lead as she moved, as though the ground itself had turned to stone beneath her. Suddenly, the world around her started to blur, her thoughts slowing. Her own reflection in a store window seemed distant, foreign. The faces, the voices, the sensations, everything began to fade into a single, suffocating wave of silence. She collapsed onto her knees, her hands gripping the pavement, but there was nothing left to hold on to. Her breath stopped, her pulse stopped, the world stopped. And then, for the first time, she realized she was not alone in the silence. She had become a part of it. Everything around her had fallen into stillness, and in that final moment, she, too, slipped away into the void. No thoughts, no sound, no feelings. Just silence. The deepest silence. And Lena was gone. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive, as though the very air itself had forgotten how to move. But beneath it, like a whisper barely heard, there was a faint hum. Something ancient. A heartbeat in the dark. A pulse that had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment. Lena's body, now still on the cold pavement, seemed to flicker, like a reflection caught in a broken mirror. For a split second, her figure wavered, rippled, and then disappeared. But her presence, her consciousness, lingered, stretching beyond the bounds of her physical form. Her mind was adrift in an endless expanse. She floated through a vast ocean of quiet. No direction, no sensation, just the weightless drift of being, suspended in time. It felt like the world had erased her, but at the same time, she could sense something, a thread connecting her to something beyond, something larger, more significant. She wasn't gone. Not entirely. She could feel it. A pull. Not physical, but something deep within her, in the very core of her being. It was as though the silence itself had given birth to a new reality, a new possibility. And she was the catalyst, the spark that would ignite whatever it was that was awakening. The hum grew louder. From nowhere and everywhere, it vibrated within her, shaking loose the remnants of her thoughts. The familiar voices of her family and friends, now distant echoes, swirled around her. Maya's voice, Eliza's laugh, her mother's soft murmurs. All these sounds, once so distant, began to pulse back into focus. Not as noise, but as a kind of energy, a current of memory. Lena could almost touch them again, feel their warmth, their presence. But this new world, it was different. Things shifted and reformed in ways she could not comprehend. The very fabric of space and time seemed to bend, as if reality itself were folding in on itself, pulling her deeper into something unknown. And then there it was, a figure, not like the man she had seen earlier, cold and distant, but a presence, a silhouette, glowing faintly in the distance. It was distant at first, but slowly, it grew closer, like a dream materializing out of the fog. Lena reached toward it instinctively, her heart thrumming with an odd sense of recognition. "Who are you?" she whispered, though no sound left her lips. Yet the figure heard her, or perhaps sensed her. The figure stepped closer, and as it did, the air seemed to shift. The hum intensified, vibrating in her very bones. And then it spoke. "You are not gone," it said, its voice deep and resonant, yet strangely comforting. "You have crossed over, but there is still a way back. You have not yet finished your journey." Lena's heart beat faster, a mix of fear and hope swelling within her. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words were trapped in the space around her. She could feel them in her chest, pressing against her skin, but they would not form. The figure stepped closer still, and Lena saw its face, or rather, the shifting image of what could be a face. It was not human, but its features held an unmistakable familiarity. The more she looked, the more it seemed like an extension of herself, a mirror of her own soul. "You are the bridge," the figure continued, "between worlds, between realities. The silence that you feel, it is not the end, but a transition, a doorway to something beyond the perception of your senses. There is still something for you to do, something you must find." Lena's mind was racing. A bridge? A doorway? The weight of the figure's words felt like a door opening in her mind, and as the figure reached out toward her, Lena instinctively grasped its hand. As soon as their fingers touched, the world around her shattered, like glass breaking in slow motion, the pieces falling in all directions. The air pulsed with light and energy, as though the very laws of nature had been rewritten. Her body was pulled, ripped from this strange dimension, as if gravity itself had lost its meaning. Her heart, her soul, everything about Lena, was thrust into something beyond understanding. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. She could feel the space between her existence and the world she once knew narrowing, like the final step of a long journey. And then, suddenly, everything went still. Lena's eyes snapped open, but there was no alarm clock, no city, no familiar hum of life. The darkness around her was absolute. She tried to move, but her limbs were heavy, as though they had been bound, as though the very air held her in place. The silence, now absolute, pressed in from all sides, suffocating her thoughts, draining the last vestiges of sensation from her body. Her breath caught in her throat, but no sound came. Lena couldn't scream, couldn't cry, couldn't even hear the panic that churned within her. She tried to open her mouth, to call out, but the very concept of sound had been erased. She was alone, locked in a void, an eternal abyss that offered no escape. The world she had once known was gone, its edges crumbling like dust in the wind, fading into the darkness. Her body, her thoughts, her very soul, were drifting farther into nothingness, slowly losing all tether to the living world. And then it hit her. She wasn't even here anymore. Not in the way she had been. The moment she had tried to reach for the figure, the moment she had tried to cross that boundary, she had slipped beyond even the fabric of her own existence. She was not alive. She was not dead. She was forgotten. In the deepest pit of silence, Lena realized with crushing finality that the bridge she had crossed had not led to a new beginning, but to the complete and utter erasure of her being. There would be no coming back. No more chances. No more time. The world she had known had moved on without her, and she had slipped into an endless void, where nothing would ever reach her again. There would be no redemption, no closure, no peace, only silence. Forever. Thank you for watching. Please support me and meet me in another video.